I'll leave it at that. I live somewhat inland from the gentleman in California. I live in a region of California that's in a basin surrounded by mountains, and so I'm very grateful for strong EPA standards that have helped clean up the air. I remember when, as a little boy, that we would have days where we couldn't go to physical education because the air quality was so bad. The air has gotten better through those standards, and there may not be cleaner air from year to year, but certainly the standards have helped us clean up the air in our region. Now, my question to Mr. Swift, is it the case that this bitumen, I learned a lot more about bitumen here, will this oil be refined within the United States, or do we expect bitumen to be exported abroad on ships to be refined in other countries?
Well, in the short term, we are expecting it to be refined in the Gulf Coast of the United States. There's nothing, there are prohibitions to exporting crude produced in the United States. Canadian producers could export the bitumen for refinement elsewhere, but the general expectation is it would move to the Gulf Coast, be refined there, and then many of the products from that would be exported internationally. When
you say the Canadians could export it, could export crude bitumen without being refined here in the United States, what do you mean by that? They mean that even though it's transported through this pipeline, it could be exported even from the endpoint in the United States directly in its crude form?
There's no legal basis for preventing them from doing that once they get it to Houston.
Okay, Mr. McCown, you're shaking your head. You disagree with that answer?
I do, yes, sir. I do disagree with that answer. You have to have an oil export license if you want to export raw crude. So I think it's if the oil does not come here and Canada builds a different pipeline system or a rail system to somewhere else, sure, it can be exported. But if it comes to the U.S., it has to be at least refined here.
The export license requirement is for crude produced in the domestic 48 states of the United States. It doesn't apply for crude produced in Alberta.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, you raised the point about the preference, the desirability of having crude refined in our country rather than other countries which may have less stringent standards. I'm just wondering if there is consensus that perhaps, or maybe at this point, to me, it brings up the possibility that maybe we should look at tighten up that provision, that all oil that leaves our shores should be refined here and meet the more stringent standards set by our EPA.
Well, one point I would make. Was that a question from?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one point I would make is that Canada has proven there's been significant opposition to pipelines that would move tar sands across Canada's west coast, to the point that even industry observers are saying that those pipelines are unlikely to move forward. And the other point to keep in mind is that China doesn't have the capacity to process heavy crudes. So based on the refinery market that we see in the world today, the real question is, does it get refined in the U.S., or does production expansion slow down? The question isn't whether we see zero tar sands production in 2030. The question is, does production go from 2 million to 3 million barrels a day, or 2 million to 6 million barrels a day? And when it comes to the environmental impacts, that makes a big difference which scenario you land on.
So it's the increased capacity that this pipeline would facilitate. It would stimulate far more rapid, intensive development of this source of bitumen.
That's exactly right.
How much experience do we have with bitumen flowing across oceans?
When it comes to Canadian tar sands bitumen, I don't think we have much experience.
Are there comparable sorts of bitumen that are transported in large container ships?
There are some heavy sources of crude from Venezuela that have some similar properties that move into Gulf Coast refineries.
Okay. Have there been any spills of this sort of bitumen of any note?
Not to my knowledge.
So my concerns are mainly about the chairman's concern about China and India having lesser standards in terms of refining. Is that a significant reason why the environmental community is concerned about? Is this what adds to the global climate change?
Well, certainly one of the key issues is, again, China and India don't have the capacity to process this crude, and Canada currently doesn't have the ability to send it to those markets. So to some extent, the real issue is whether the only way that tar sands crude or its refined products get to the international market right now is via Keystone XL.
Okay, thank you.